Um, we want this to be an interactive session. What's really nice about Zoom, you can always type in your questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, please go ahead and type them in. Also, after we're done, and you can expect maybe about 20-25 minutes of presentation first, mostly by Eric. Afterwards, we'll kind of open it up and people can ask questions either through the chat or just by doing it in person as well. Yeah, the presentation is being done mainly by Eric Souter and myself. We're both employees of TeamAg. Eric has been with us for the last 4 years, and I've been with TeamAg since we started in 2002. We want to acknowledge the following for this presentation who have contributed to this. First of all, the Pennsylvania Farm Show, making this a virtual event. Also, the NRCS provided a conservation innovation grant to TeamAg for regenerative farming, and so we're grateful for that, and part of those funds are being used for paying for this presentation. And then also to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. We've been working with them on 11 farms doing Vitality Farm Plan grants in which we focus on regenerative agriculture. So we're very grateful for these organizations that have supported us. I'd like to talk a little bit about TeamAg. TeamAg's goal is to improve their economic and environmental performance. And we do that through providing 3 different services. The first service is just if a farm wants to decides to modernize or add manure storage facilities or manure systems, new facilities, they will probably need engineering and land planning, getting permits and that sort of thing. We have a large department of qualified engineers that do that work. We also have several agronomists who do crop consulting, mostly in the Lancaster, York, Chester County areas. And of course, we work throughout the state with the agricultural plans, doing conservation plans, ag E&S plans, as well as nutrient management planning and manure management planning. So it's through these 3 different services that we support farms in improving their economic and environmental performance. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think I'll turn it over now to Eric, and Eric will go ahead and introduce everyone to regenerative ag. And again, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat down at the bottom, or hold off until the end when we will have it more interactive. So thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for joining us today. I know the farm show is a bit different this year, but I appreciate you all for joining in and rolling with it. So what we're looking to cover today is first an overview of what is regenerative ag, and talk a bit about what all the hype is about, and see if there are ways that it can tangibly benefit your farm. So starting off with what is regenerative agriculture. In its most basic, regenerative agriculture restores life to degraded ecosystems. So if you look at these 3 charts, we're all familiar with the Dust Bowl and pictures from out west in the 30s when soil was just blowing away in these massive clouds. And you can think about that as a degrading ecosystem. So that's one model of farming that we've been moving away from rapidly and learning how to conserve our soils. But on the other side is really this model of agriculture where, it's not just breaking even, but we're actually building soils and we're cleaning water and increasing biodiversity through the work that we're doing on the ground as farmers. And the way I like to think about it is that as a regenerative farmer, you really have a whole new set of crops or these ecosystem services that you're looking to cultivate. And this really is, a lot of this work is rooted in principles of soil health. And so I wanted to talk about the 5 core principles here today. First is keeping an armor on the surface. So you want to keep your soil protected. And this has primary benefits of controlling wind and water erosion. If you think about 5 tons of soil across an acre, it's just the thickness of a dime. And you can imagine that blowing or washing away, even in almost in a single storm event. But keeping armor on the surface also reduces evaporation rates, helps to retain moisture for plants. It moderates soil temperatures, which benefit the soil food web. It suppresses weed growth too. So there's all these benefits associated with keeping your surface covered. But then also we want to minimize disturbance to the soil. And this could be biological disturbance through overgrazing, or chemical disturbance through over application of nutrient and pesticide, or what we're probably most familiar with, physical disturbance through tillage. Ultimately, tillage results in erosion and a hard crust on the soil that causes ponding of water, and depletion of soil organic matter. Third, we want to maintain a living root in the soil through the entire year. So think about cover crops. As a baseline, they keep the ground covered, but they do a lot more than that. So a living root harvests CO2 to feed carbon to the soil food web. It builds soil aggregates and pore spaces, which improve infiltration of water. And you can even design multi-species cover crop blends to work as your ally as a farmer. They can be designed to break up compaction or capture and fix other nutrients, and work alongside the specific goals that you have for a field. Then next, we want to ensure that there's a diversity of plants in a field. Diversity is really nature's way, and this can come through both crop rotations, but also so year on year, but also through planting really diverse species, like those multi-species cover crops. And diverse soil biology comes from diverse plant communities. So that's really an important tie here in the health of our soils. And then finally, integrate livestock on soil. Livestock on the landscape is a really good thing. It eases, of course, your feed and manure management because they're right there. It helps to manage weed pressure, and cows on pasture, if managed well, can actually sequester carbon. So a lot of these soil health practices are really common here in Pennsylvania because of the focus on water quality. So we see some of these really tangible impacts on water quality, like increasing infiltration and reducing runoff, reducing sedimentation, and limiting nitrogen and phosphorus into waterways. And some of this is just really striking when you look at percent adoption of these types of practices around here compared to the Midwest. So this is from Indigo Ag. They have an annual progress report that has remote sensing maps of fields and percent adoption of different practices. So this is cover crops. You can see they're utilized quite a bit around here, where then in the Midwest, you're kind of lonely if you're a farmer cover cropping. So these practices aren't just good for the bay and for waterways. It has really tangible impacts for your farm. We already talked about water infiltration improving, but water retention does as well. So for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, it can make 25,000 more gallons of water available to your plants through the year. So you can see how this makes you much more resilient in times of excess rainfall and also in times of drought. This is an image from a leader in some of the regenerative ag work here in the US, Gabe Brown, and it shows year to year how he went from no-till and cover crop integration, then went to multi-species cover crops, and then started integrating more livestock on the landscape. And through that time saw his topsoil depth increase, but also soil organic matter increased really dramatically over that time. And so this has real benefit to your farm, but it's also a tool that is through photosynthesis taking CO2 out of the air and storing it in the ground. And that has really important impacts for climate change. And the world is captured, the attention of the world is captured by this idea. And so we see articles like this. This was in the New York Times 2 years ago, Can Dirt Save the Earth? And so people who never really thought that much about farming before are now reading that agriculture can be an important solution for climate change. And so I want to take a couple minutes to dive into the relationship between climate change and agriculture. So first, climate change has really important impacts on the way that we farm. So agriculture, of course, functions best with predictability. And climate change is a threat and a change in that predictability. So heavier rainfall takes a look at some of the expectations that and predictions that we have for Pennsylvania, and some of the things that we're already seeing here. But heavier annual rainfall and increased totals, increased temperatures, shifting of hardiness zones, and all of that adds up to increased economic risk. A really great resource here is Cornell's Climate Smart Farming website. So they have incredible county level data since 1950 on average temperatures, high temperatures, and growing degree days, as well as precipitation. So you can see what have these trends looked like here in our county. What all of this stems from, and some of the basic climate science here, is based on the greenhouse effect. So the atmosphere is like a blanket around the Earth, and it's made up of a lot of different gases. And CO2 and methane are some of these greenhouse gases. And it's called that because the sun's light comes through the atmosphere and reflects off the Earth and is reflected then back to the Earth from the atmosphere. And so as we change the chemical composition of the atmosphere, we change how much of that heat is trapped in. It's like adding another blanket. And so we see that total warming caused from it. This is ice core data over the past 800,000 years that shows changes in CO2 concentration over time. So yes, there are changes in climate and changes in the CO2 concentrations as a result of that, or that drive that. And so yes, climate is changing historically through time, and that itself isn't a concern. But what is really different about this time in Earth's history is that we're really far out of the range of any of the prior variations. So, you know, maybe the maximum before was 280 parts per million, and now we're up above 415 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. So when people are talking about the challenge of reversing climate change, it's really pulling down that parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. CO2 comes from lots of different industries, and agriculture is one of the smaller contributors to that. It is usually somewhere between 10 and 20% of overall emissions. It kind of depends on how food and some other related industries are grouped into that. But what is particularly unique about agriculture is it's the only industry that could go from a net emitter of CO2 to one that puts more CO2 into the ground. It's the only one that can do that. But we have an array of different solutions that people are looking at for how to reverse climate change. And you can see from just this graph that there's no single one thing that can do it. It's an array of solutions. But my takeaway from the work done here by a group called Project Drawdown is that many of the solutions, especially the top solutions here, 12 out of the top 20 are coming from land and food. So agriculture is just really central to the core solutions for how we could reverse global warming. And that's why people are really paying attention. When we look at Pennsylvania as a whole, we see the capacity to sequester 1.66 million tons. And you can see how many homes or cars that's equivalent to. So it's a really big deal. And there's some scientists that will take that projection farther. This is also from Indigo Ag, their Teraton initiative. They're saying that it's possible for global agricultural soils to hold all of the excess CO2 that's been emitted since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So there's this really wide range of the capacity that people feel that agriculture could provide. But regardless, it's a really central solution, and that's why people are paying attention. And I just wanted to spend a second on what some of the alternatives are. So this is a group called Climeworks that's one of the leaders in direct air capture. So these are essentially mechanical carbon suckers, and they exist, they draw in air and pull the CO2 out of it. Remember, it's only like 415 parts per million. So there's not a whole lot of CO2 per unit of air. And they take that and turn it into some liquid or plastic product. You know, I think this is actually important technology to develop, but think how much easier it is to incentivize farmers to do this work. And I just think this is an important thing to like sit with for a minute, that if it's important for us to be doing this kind of work, think how much more sense it makes to have agriculture be a central solution here. And industry is responding in similar ways. So US Dairy announced last April their goal to be net zero across the entire dairy supply chain by 2050. And at TeamAg, we're having a lot of different conversations with companies and brands that are looking to do the same thing and make these kind of advances within their supply chains. So this is something that's people are starting to pay attention to, and is starting to gain traction. Some of the ways that I want to shift in the presentation to some of the ways that this transition is starting to happen. These are three things that are powering that through ecosystem services, transition finance, and then also product premiums. So I'll start out with ecosystem services, and these are really ways that you are providing value to the earth, to the ecosystem and people on it through the farming that you're doing. So one of those is through sequestering carbon, and there are new marketplaces that are emerging through that. So this is a company called Nori that's developing one of the first marketplaces where farmers are able to list their supply or land that's been transitioned in the last 10 years to no-till and cover cropping, and connect with buyers who are voluntarily looking to offset their emissions. So an example of this is like a Microsoft. You might have heard this announcement from last year where they're looking to be carbon negative by 2030, and they hope to offset all of their historic emissions by 2050. So there's some really big leaders like this that are pushing forward these voluntary marketplaces. And again, this isn't any kind of government market either, though those kind of marketplaces exist in some states and may federally at some point. Another example is Regen Network, and they're interested in carbon as well, but they are looking to create more ecological contracts and the ecological change of state protocols for a really wide array of ecosystem services. So to even imagine something like pollinator density being addressed, where you might have a particular funder that's interested in this, they would help to set up the ecological contracts and the ecological state protocols that say, here's how you measure what the initial state is. This is the desired change of state. And here's how we would measure that change from A to B. Speaking of these transitions, there's a lot of really creative financial vehicles that are starting to emerge to help with these transitions. One is called the Perennial Fund. So they are recognizing that in the first 3 to 5 years of adopting organic ag or some kind of regenerative transition, there's often some additional costs incurred with that. And you're not necessarily able to achieve the price premium for your products. So MADAG, through the Perennial Fund, is working to plug that capital valley with transitional capital that allows your profits to be consistent. And then at the point where you're able to receive a price premium for the goods you're producing, that loan would be repaid. They are available to help in all of the knowledge support through that transition. And what's really kind of amazing about the loan that they're putting forward is that if they're not able to help you repay that loan, then it's forgiven, which is an interesting way to go about both financing transitions and also conservation, because there's real conservation wins that are happening through these transitions as well. I mentioned a little bit the product premiums for goods. One of the companies that we're having conversations with right now is called Origin Milk, a dairy processor that's already operating but expanding in Pennsylvania. They have regenerative A2 Guernsey milk, and they are finding that the market bears a cost of $400 or $40 per hundredweight, which is just a really wild price for regenerative milk. But that's what they're basing their expansion on here in Pennsylvania. So one of the questions I think that emerges from some of this is who's setting the standard for what regeneration means? And one of those is also based here. The Rodale Institute is in Kutztown. They've been a leader in organic ag since 1970. They are one of the core founders of the Regenerative Organic Alliance. So their certification here is rooted in soil health, animal welfare, and farm worker fairness. You can feel free to research that more, but I think this will be one of the emerging core certifications. It's what Origin is looking to go after, that helps to define what some of the criteria are for transitioning to regenerative. So as we've been seeing these different opportunities emerge at TeamAg, we wondered, how can we better help farmers to deepen the adoption of regenerative ag? And we've really been guided by these questions. So first, how do we benchmark farms? How do we know where you are right now? How do we identify opportunities for regeneration at the farm level? How do we help farmers gain new economic clarity around regenerative ag decisions? And how do farmers access new markets for regenerative products and ecosystem services? So these questions and this work has really emerged as our work in the regenerative farm business plan. And we're grateful to the governor and Secretary Redding at Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture for creating the Agricultural Business Development Center, which has enabled some of our work here through 11 farm vitality grants across Pennsylvania. And so these are really business plans that dive into these questions of what are the opportunities for farmers and how could they work on this transition. And then also grateful to NRCS and PA Conservation Innovation Grant that helps to focus on deepening our economic analysis for expanding to smaller Pennsylvania farms. So some of the outcomes that we are forming these plans around is to help improve soil health, to decrease the cost of inputs and energy use for farms, to diversify revenue streams, and to access markets offering premium pricing for regenerative products. And the focus area of these plans are on soil health, crop, animal, and manure management, water quality, biodiversity, energy, and economics. So we're still not at a point with the full set of farms where we can provide kind of aggregate and anonymous data, but we did pull together kind of a sample 100-acre farm to show what some of the high-level impacts of this work could be possible. So this is imagining the water and carbon impacts of a 100-acre farm transitioning to no-till and cover cropping practices alone. So with that, you could imagine sediment reductions of about 200 tons per year, nitrogen of about 300 pounds per year, and phosphorus, again, at 200 pounds per year. And then a total carbon drawdown of about 163 tons of CO2, which to put into some perspective is about 400,000 miles driven by an average car or the energy use of 20 homes. And from a cost or value perspective of that economically, the markets are still are really emerging for this. So nori is trading at $15 per ton for carbon. So that's $2,400 per year for the value of that carbon. But there's other marketplaces that are smaller and maybe more place and story based that are offering closer to $100 per ton. So it's interesting. It's still really new. It's an important emerging marketplace. Some of the closing thoughts that we have for this: regeneration is a journey, and it's a journey that many farmers have already been on through their investment in their work in soil health. And I think farmers here in Pennsylvania can be really proud of the advancements that they've made in soil health and water quality. Also, regenerative ag is a really interesting and deep alignment between agriculture and conservation. We see these two working hand in hand, and what's good for the farmer economically in regenerative ag is good for the environment as well. Many new opportunities are emerging right now, and they have very real financial impacts. And if there's one tangible takeaway from the work that we're doing in helping to connect farmers with those tangible impacts, financial impacts, is that farm records are really important. So as you think about things that you can do to begin pursuing this, if you're interested to dive deeper, exploring regeneration on your farm, we're happy to help. But these are a couple of valuable first steps. First, with planning, you can't manage what you're not measuring right now, and a plan is a first step. So if you're not current with your conservation or manure management plans, work with a trusted partner to do this as a first step. With records, start now to tidy up the way that you keep your data on your farm. There's lots of software platforms that are emerging to do this, but really, we need to, a lot of the ecosystem services marketplaces really are looking to know, what you're planning, when, different fertilizer applications, how much, when, what your yields are. It can be a pretty extensive data requirement. And then as you're keeping those records, what trends are you noticing? Has your organic matter changed over time? Is it going up? Are important metrics for soil health changing in positive directions, or are they kind of stagnant? It starts to get you thinking about ways that you could begin to improve your soil health. So that's the end of the presentation, and we look forward to hearing questions.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, feel free either to type in your questions, or I will also open up that everybody can talk. If I trying to unmute everybody. I'm not sure, Eric, can you do that?
You can do it individually.
Yeah, you can all do that individually. Yeah, what questions might you have?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we didn't catch that. Could you repeat that question, please? Or in order to ask the question, you'll need to unmute yourself. And if it doesn't work, you can always type into the chat box down at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, maybe just one thing, just here in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture has, last year, they gave out small grants to farms to do Vitality Farm plans or business plans. And TeamAg was able to work with 11 farms in getting those grants. That program did close this last year, but I understand it will resume again. This could be a really good opportunity to, if farms are interested in taking part in that. So be in touch with us at TeamAg. We're located in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, and you can find us on the internet or in Facebook. And you can see it, there's email addresses for both Eric and I. Any other questions? If not, we'll just keep it open for a little while, and people are welcome to unmute yourselves and then ask a question, or else you can type something in the chat box.
Hey, Eric, can you hear me?
Yeah, so Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, appreciate the presentation. Curious how you see the technology developing around measurement, especially for carbon sequestration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting field because right now a lot of the testing is one of the prohibitors of cost for its scaling. So a single test could be $150, $200 to get some of the deeper analysis for these soil health measurements. But there's more handheld spectral devices that are emerging that would, there's a group called Quick Carbon that would enable in-field tests in minutes for a fraction of that price. So that's some of the actual soil measurement. But then another aspect of the verification that's developing really rapidly too is the remote sensing for practice verification. So in the last 4 or 5 years, the amount of satellite data that's available on a really frequent basis, and also spectral data that gives signatures for that would allow you to tell whether there are crops and what species, and whether ground is bare or has crop residue on it, are free. The European Space Agency had the Sentinel satellite series that just has a wild amount of publicly available data. So it's pretty easy for groups to be able to put together these models for adoption of no-till and cover cropping, like we saw from Indigo Ag.
There's a question from Barbara. What is the smallest farm that you have helped to reorganize to regenerative ag? I guess what I'd like to mention, the first 11 farms that we're working with were medium-sized to large-sized farms, and these were ones that were already doing soil health practices, no-till and cover crop for most of them. But we are now really trying to focus more, and the reason we did that approach was really just to measure what is the carbon footprint of those farms, and that they were eager to see that as well. And 10 of the 11 were dairies. But what we're interested, TeamAg is interested now to really approach the smaller farms as well, and to help them. So to answer your question, Barbara, we'd be open to any size farm, but up to now, we have not done vegetable or horticultural practices. Mostly it's all been either crops and livestock. So, but we're open to anything. So let us know.
I wouldn't say there's any lower bound in size for looking at this regenerative framework overall. There are lower thresholds on where some of the ecosystem registries right now would make sense, probably, because the verification and work for that has some kind of fixed cost that only makes sense as you get a bit bigger in acreage. But that's one of the things that with some of like the conservation innovation grant with the state that we're looking to pursue. How can smaller farmers also engage in those marketplaces and benefit from them as well? Is there a way that we could aggregate the contributions from a larger number of farms, especially as more of the like remote verification is possible? Is there a way that we can assign credit more cheaply for individual farms?
Any other questions? Well, I hope you all enjoy the rest of the farm show, and I look forward to next year where we can have milkshakes. Oh, here's another question. What is the reliable technology or innovation to apply to increase crop yields and maintain soil quality in regenerative ag? Basically, with the regenerative ag, it might take a couple years to make that switch. With regenerative ag, we're especially if you go organic, it would be to no longer use chemical fertilizers, and so your yields will drop. And but over time they'll pick up as soil fertility improves. And that's where Eric had mentioned there are these funds here, such as the perennial fund, that will help to cover those costs that farmers may experience as they adopt this new technology.
And another aspect that's often a part of it is a shift from maybe yield is the highest metric to profit per acre is the
Mm.
highest metric. So you might see your yield drop, but also your cost of inputs drop, and so come out even in the same way.
It's nice to have you, Marcus, from Indonesia. I also lived in Indonesia from 1987 to 92. I was in Manokwari in Papua.
Yes, good to hear, John.
Yeah.
I
Hope
think
you
you
will
win
come
the-
back to look at the current situation in Manokwari.
Yeah, I would like to go back. Yes, yes.
I think you win the
Yeah,
long
yeah, but
distance
it is
award.
very, very hardship time in Indonesia due to the COVID-19 at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. I
Terima
like
kasih.
to hear the explanation for the regenerative agriculture.
Yeah. Is there a movement for that in Indonesia?
Yeah, at the moment we try to ask for the young generation to be involved in agriculture, especially for they call it the millennial people to be more involved because at the moment not many young generation interested in the agricultural field. So we are trying to find how do we encourage those young people to be involved
Mhm.
because the future talents for agriculture probably will be no more available labor, and if we make attempt to promote any looks like mechanization in agriculture, so the young millennial people will be more interested because most people perceive agricultural practice is dirty. So we are trying to encourage people to use them machinery or high modern technology in order to increase the people want to interest in agricultural field.
Mhm. Are you a professor? In
Oh,
what kind of
yeah,
work do
yeah.
you do?
Yeah, I'm a principal researcher in agricultural research and development in Indonesia.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I used to my work was with Fakultas Pertanian in Manokwari at that time Universitas Cendrawasih. I'm not sure if I think it's
Oh,
changed
okay, yeah,
names.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. I know the university, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to meet you.
It's so great to have you here.
Yeah, yeah. Nice to see you everyone.
Yeah.
At
Okay.
yeah, at 3 a.m. in Indonesia at the moment.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, glad you could join us. Are you looking at other sessions here at the Pennsylvania Farm Show?
Yeah, yeah. I like to hear about people talking about agriculture, especially when they talking about soil, crops, modeling, and then how to improve the present existing knowledge for the future direction of our agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, nice to see you all.
Right. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Well, I think I don't see any more questions. So maybe we'll just sign off now. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We hope this was useful. And again, please contact us if you have other questions or you want to learn more on this topic. All right. Thank you. Bye.